I was halfway through installing a new radiant heater in my woodworking shop when I heard the sharp knock on my workshop door that would turn my entire winter upside down. Standing there in her pressed khaki pantsuit with a clipboard clutched against her chest like a shield was Patricia Brenner, the vice president of the Meadowbrook Hills HOA. Her lips pursed so tight they could have cracked walnuts. I wiped the grease off my hands with a rag and pushed open the door. The November wind carried the smell of dead leaves and impending snow into my workshop. "Good afternoon, Patricia. What can I do for you?" She didn't return the greeting. Her eyes swept past me, scanning the interior of my detached workshop with the intensity of a health inspector in a questionable restaurant. "Mr. Bradley, I'm here to inform you that your new heating installation is in violation of HOA Code Section 47.3. I blinked at her, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "This is a certified radiant workshop heater. I had it professionally installed just last week." Patricia's face transformed into what I'd come to recognize as her signature expression of barely concealed triumph. "The HOA board received an anonymous complaint about excessive power usage and potential fire hazards coming from your property. We've determined that your workshop heater violates our community standards for auxiliary structures." Auxiliary structures. I looked back at my shop, a solid 15 by 20 building I'd constructed 3 years ago with full permits and inspections. "Patricia, I built this workshop completely legal. I have all the permits from Jefferson County. The heater installation was done by a licensed contractor." She made a note on her clipboard with the deliberate slowness of someone who enjoyed wielding petty authority. "HOA regulations supersede county permits, Mr. Bradley. Section 47.3 clearly states that any heating system in an auxiliary structure must not exceed 1,500 watts of power consumption." That's insane. A 1,500-watt heater couldn't warm a closet, let alone a workshop in Colorado winter. Those are the rules. Patricia handed me a printed notice with the HOA letterhead. "You have 14 days to remove the heating system or face daily fines of $100. Good day." She turned on her heel and marched back toward her silver Lexus parked at the curb. I stood there holding the notice, feeling my blood pressure rising with each word I read. The document cited obscure HOA regulations I'd never heard of, threatened escalating fines, and even mentioned potential legal action if I didn't comply. My name is Paul Bradley, and I'd lived in Meadowbrook Hills, a subdivision on the outskirts of Boulder, Colorado, for 5 years. I'd moved here after my divorce, seeking a fresh start and a place where I could pursue my woodworking hobby without disturbing neighbors. The community seemed perfect at first, with its tree-lined streets, well-maintained common areas, and reasonable HOA fees. What I hadn't realized was that the HOA board, particularly Patricia and her cronies, treated the subdivision like their personal fiefdom. I went back inside my workshop and looked at the new heater mounted on the wall. The Titan 3000 was a state-of-the-art radiant heating system, energy efficient despite its power draw, and absolutely necessary if I wanted to continue working through the Colorado winter. I'd spent $2,000 on the unit and another $800 on professional installation. The installer, a guy named Mike Hendricks from Boulder Heating and Cooling, had assured me everything was up to code. I pulled out my phone and called Mike. "Boulder Heating, this is Mike." "Mike, it's Paul Bradley. You installed that radiant heater in my workshop last week." "Sure, I remember. Great unit. Everything working okay. The heater's fine, but my HOA just served me with a violation notice. They're saying the power consumption violates their codes." There was a pause. "That's ridiculous. We pulled a proper electrical permit from Jefferson County. The inspection passed with flying colors. Your heater is completely compliant with all Colorado building codes, electrical codes, and safety standards. They're saying HOA rules supersede county permits. Mike snorted. That's not how it works. Look, I've dealt with overzealous HOAs before. Sometimes they get ideas in their heads about what's allowed and what isn't. But legally speaking, if you have a valid county permit and the installation passed inspection, you're protected. The HOA can't arbitrarily decide that a legal installation is suddenly illegal. Can you send me copies of all the permit documents? I'll email them within the hour. And Paul, don't let them bully you. You're in the right here. After hanging up, I sat down at my workbench and really read through the HOA notice. The section they cited, 47.3, supposedly limited power consumption in auxiliary structures. But I'd read through the HOA covenants when I bought my house. I'd read them again before building my workshop. I'd never seen any such restriction. I walked back to my house, a modest 3-bedroom ranch with a view of the Flatirons in the distance, and dug out my copy of the HOA covenants and restrictions. The document was 73 pages of legal language, but I'd highlighted the relevant sections years ago. Section 47 dealt with auxiliary structures, but it said nothing about power consumption limits. The restrictions focused on size, setbacks from property lines, and aesthetic requirements to match the main house. There was no subsection 47.3 about wattage limits. My phone buzzed with an email from Mike. True to his word, he'd sent scanned copies of the electrical permit, the inspection report, and the installation certification. Every document bore official Jefferson County stamps and signatures. The inspection report specifically noted that the heater installation met all current electrical and safety codes. I had my ammunition. Now, I needed to figure out how to use it. The next morning, I drove to the HOA management office located in a small business complex near Highway 36. Meadowbrook Hills contracted with a property management company called Summit Community Services to handle day-to-day operations. The actual office was surprisingly modest, just a few rooms with filing cabinets and a reception desk where a young woman named Emily greeted residents. "Hi, I'm Paul Bradley from Meadowbrook Hills. I need to speak with someone about an HOA violation notice I received." Emily's friendly smile faltered. "Oh, okay. Let me see if Deborah is available." Deborah Carmichael was the property manager assigned to our subdivision. She was in her 50s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the tired expression of someone who dealt with neighborhood disputes all day. She invited me into her small office and gestured to a chair. "What can I help you with, Mr. Bradley?" I handed her the violation notice. "Patricia Brenner gave me this yesterday. It claims my workshop heater violates HOA codes, but I have a valid county permit and passed inspection. I also can't find this section 47.3 anywhere in our actual covenants." Deborah studied the notice, her frown deepening. "Give me a moment." She pulled up the HOA documents on her computer and scrolled through them. Her frown became more pronounced. She opened another file, then another. Finally, she looked up at me with something between confusion and embarrassment. "Mr. Bradley, there is no Section 47.3 in your HOA covenants. Section 47 ends at subsection 2, which deals with exterior paint colors for auxiliary structures. So this entire violation notice is based on a rule that doesn't exist. It appears so." Deborah picked up her phone. "Let me call Patricia and clear this up." I listened to Deborah's side of the conversation. It started professionally enough, but Patricia's voice grew loud enough that I could hear her sharp tone even through the phone. Patricia, I'm looking at the covenants right now. There's no subsection 3 in section 47. Patricia's response was indistinct but clearly argumentative. No, the board can't just create new restrictions without following the amendment process. You need a vote, resident notification, the whole procedure. More angry sounds from the phone. Patricia, I'm going to have to retract this violation notice. Mr. Bradley has valid county permits and passed inspection. There's no legitimate basis for the violation. The call ended with Patricia hanging up abruptly. Deborah set down her phone and rubbed her temples. I apologize for this, Mr. Bradley. Sometimes board members get overzealous. I'll send you a formal retraction of the violation by end of business today. I appreciate that. But I'm concerned about why this happened in the first place. Deborah hesitated, clearly weighing how much to say. Between you and me, Patricia has been on the board for 8 years. She's very dedicated, but she sometimes sees violations where none exist. I've had to push back before. Has she made up regulations before? I wouldn't say made up. More like misremembered or misinterpreted. Usually we catch it before notices go out. I'm sorry this one slipped through. I left the management office feeling somewhat vindicated but also uneasy. Something about Patricia's aggressive approach bothered me. The violation notice had been too specific, too confident in its false claims. It didn't feel like a simple mistake. That evening, I was in my workshop sanding down a maple table when my neighbor, Gary Richmond, knocked on the door. Gary was retired military, a straight shooter who'd lived in Meadowbrook Hills since the subdivision was built 15 years ago. Hey Paul, heard you had some trouble with the HOA. News travels fast. Gary stepped inside, admiring my current project. Patricia came by my place this afternoon asking questions about your workshop. Wanted to know if I'd heard loud noises, smelled anything unusual, seen anything concerning. You're kidding. I wish I was. I told her your shop is quieter than my own garage and you're a model neighbor. She didn't like that answer. I set down my sandpaper. Gary, have you ever had problems with Patricia? Oh, plenty. 3 years ago she tried to fine me for my flagpole being 2 feet higher than HOA regulations allowed, except the regulations didn't specify a height limit. She backed down when I showed up to a board meeting with my lawyer. She made up a rule then too. Not made up so much as imagined. I think she genuinely believed there was a height restriction. The woman has so many rules in her head that she can't keep track of what's real and what she wishes was real. Deborah at the management office retracted the violation today. She confirmed there's no section 47.3. Gary nodded slowly. Good, but Paul, watch your back. Patricia doesn't like being wrong, and she really doesn't like being publicly corrected. When she backed down on my flagpole, she spent the next 6 months looking for any other violation she could pin on me. Found one too, a crack in my driveway that supposedly violated aesthetic standards. Cost me $3 grand to repave. That's harassment. It's HOA politics. Technically, she was within her rights on the driveway. The crack was there, but she'd ignored it for 2 years until I embarrassed her. After Gary left, I sat in my workshop running through my options. I could let this go, accept the retraction, and hope Patricia moved on to bothering someone else. Or I could push back, maybe attend a board meeting and demand answers about why false violation notices were being issued. The decision was made for me 3 days later when I found a new notice tucked into my front door. This time it wasn't about the heater. This notice cited section 23.7, claiming that my workshop's exterior paint color didn't match my house closely enough, and demanding I repaint within 30 days or face fines. I walked around my property examining both buildings. The workshop was painted the same shade of gray-blue as my house. I'd used leftover paint from my house when I built the shop specifically to ensure they matched. They were identical. I took photographs with my phone, making sure to capture both buildings in the same shots to document the matching colors. Then I drove back to the Summit Community Services office. Emily recognized me and her face fell. "Oh no, not again. Afraid so." This time Deborah didn't even look surprised when I showed her the new notice. She pulled up the photos from the HOA files showing my property. The workshop and house were clearly the same color. "This is getting out of hand," Deborah said. "I'm going to call an emergency board meeting." This is the third false violation notice this month. Third. Who else is Patricia targeting? I shouldn't say, but since this is becoming a pattern issue, you should know. The Martinez family got cited for an illegal fence that was actually built by the previous homeowner 10 years ago and has been documented in our files the whole time. And Carol Simpson got a notice about her mailbox being the wrong style, even though it's the standard mailbox that every house in the subdivision has. So Patricia is just harassing random homeowners. I don't know if it's random. You three are the most recent people who have pushed back on board decisions in the past year. That got my attention. What do you mean? Deborah pulled up meeting minutes on her computer. 6 months ago, there was a proposal to increase HOA fees by 40% to build a new playground in the common area. You, the Martinez family, and Carol Simpson all attended the meeting and spoke against it. The proposal failed. You think Patricia is retaliating? I think Patricia takes opposition personally, and I think she's using violation notices as a weapon. That's not how HOAs are supposed to function. What can we do about it? Officially, you can request a hearing with the full board to dispute the violation. You can also petition to remove board members, but that requires signatures from 30% of homeowners and a recall vote. What do you recommend? Deborah closed her office door, which she hadn't done during my previous visit. Off the record, document everything. Every notice, every interaction. Get copies of all your permits and approvals, and start talking to your neighbors. If Patricia is targeting multiple people with false violations, that's a pattern of harassment. The board can be held legally liable for that. I left with copies of both violation notices and a growing sense that this was about to get much worse before it got better. That weekend, I invited the Martinez family and Carol Simpson to my house. Roberto and Linda Martinez were in their 30s with 2 young kids. Carol was a widow in her 60s who'd lived in Meadowbrook Hills for a decade. We sat in my living room comparing our violation notices. "Mine came 2 weeks ago," Roberto said. "They claimed our fence violated height restrictions, but we didn't build the fence. It was here when we bought the house 5 years ago." "Did you dispute it?" I asked. "We tried. We showed them the home inspection from when we bought the place, which showed the fence already existing. Patricia said it didn't matter, that we were responsible for previous owners' violations." Carol shook her head. "That's not how it works. There's a statute of limitations on violations. After a certain period, if the HOA hasn't enforced a rule, they can't suddenly start. It's called selective enforcement, and it's illegal." "How do you know all this?" Linda asked. "I'm retired, but I worked as a paralegal for 30 years. I've seen HOA disputes before. What Patricia is doing is textbook harassment and selective enforcement." "So what do we do?" Roberto asked. Carol pulled out a folder. "I've already filed complaints with Summit Community Services. I've also started documenting everything. Every interaction, every notice, every conversation. And I've been reading the Colorado HOA laws. There are protections for homeowners against this kind of behavior." I talked to Deborah at Summit, I said. She suggested we might need to petition for Patricia's removal from the board. That's difficult but not impossible, Carol said. We'd need a lot of signatures, though, and we'd need to convince people that Patricia is the problem, not just a strict enforcer of rules. She's not enforcing rules, Roberto said, his voice rising. She's making them up. Our fence has been there for over a decade. Your workshop heater has county approval. Carol's mailbox is identical to every other mailbox on the street. These aren't violations. They're vendettas. We spent the next hour strategizing. Carol would research the legal options. Roberto would start quietly talking to neighbors about their experiences with the HOA. I would attend the next board meeting and formally challenge my violation notices. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening at the Meadowbrook Hills Community Center, a modest building with a meeting room that could hold about 50 people. Normally, these meetings drew maybe 10 residents, mostly retirees with nothing better to do. When I arrived at 6:30, the parking lot was already half full. Inside, I found at least 30 residents filling the chairs. Word had spread about Patricia's violation notices. Carol Simpson sat in the front row with a thick folder of documents. The Martinez family was there with several other young families I recognized from the neighborhood. Gary Richmond gave me a nod from the back row. The board sat at a table facing the room. Patricia Brenner was in the center, flanked by the HOA president, Donald Fletcher, and the treasurer, Margaret Holmes. Donald was a retired accountant in his 70s who mostly deferred to Patricia on daily operations. Margaret was newer to the board, having joined just last year. Donald called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. We have quite a turnout tonight. Let's begin with the regular agenda and then we'll open for resident comments. The regular agenda was mind-numbingly boring. Financial reports, landscaping contract renewals, approval of meeting minutes from last month. Several residents started checking their phones. Then we reached resident comments. Carol Simpson stood first. I'm here to formally dispute the violation notice I received regarding my mailbox. This mailbox has been in place for 8 years without any previous complaints. It's identical to standard mailboxes throughout the subdivision. The violation notice cites no specific regulation it violates, and I believe this notice was issued in retaliation for my opposition to the fee increase proposal last spring. Patricia's face hardened. Miss Simpson, personal attacks are not appropriate for board meetings. I'm not making a personal attack. I'm stating facts. The timing and nature of these violation notices suggest a pattern of retaliation. That's absurd. The board enforces all regulations fairly and consistently. Roberto Martinez stood up. Then why did I receive a notice about a fence that's been on my property since before I bought my house? A fence that's been documented in HOA records for over a decade. Patricia shuffled papers in front of her. Previous boards may have been lax in enforcement. This board is more thorough. I stood up. I received 2 violation notices in 1 week. The first claimed my workshop heater violated a regulation that doesn't exist. When that was retracted, I immediately got a second notice claiming my workshop paint doesn't match my house, even though they're painted the same color. That's not thorough enforcement, that's harassment. The room erupted in conversation. Several other residents stood up, apparently ready to share their own stories. Donald Fletcher, looking overwhelmed, banged his gavel. Order, please. These are serious allegations. They are, Carol said. And they require a serious response. I'm formally requesting a full board review of all violation notices issued in the past 6 months, with specific attention to which board member initiated each notice and what documentation supported the violation. Patricia's face had gone red. This is a witch hunt. I've dedicated years to this community, volunteering my time to maintain our property values and quality of life. I won't be attacked for doing my job. No one's attacking you for doing your job, I said. We're questioning violation notices that cite non-existent regulations or ignore documented evidence. That's not doing your job. That's abusing your authority. Donald looked at Deborah, who was sitting to the side taking minutes. Deborah, can you prepare a report on recent violation notices? I can have it ready within a week, Deborah said carefully. However, I should note that I've already expressed concerns to board members about some of the recent notices. What concerns? Margaret Holmes asked. She looked genuinely confused, as if this was the first she'd heard of any problems. Several notices have cited regulations that don't exist or misinterpreted existing regulations. I've had to retract multiple notices after reviewing the actual covenants. Margaret turned to Patricia. Is this true? Deborah is new to her position and still learning our subdivision's specific requirements, Patricia said. Sometimes there's confusion about interpretation. There's no confusion, Deborah said, her voice stronger now. Section 47.3, which was cited in Mr. Bradley's first violation notice, does not exist in the Meadowbrook Hills covenants. I've reviewed the documents thoroughly. The meeting devolved from there. More residents stood up sharing experiences with questionable violation notices. Someone mentioned that Patricia had served on the Architectural Review Committee for years and had a reputation for rejecting renovation plans for arbitrary reasons. Someone else pointed out that Patricia's own property had a garden shed that appeared to violate the setback requirements she enforced so strictly on others. Donald tried to maintain order, but clearly had no idea how to handle the uprising. Eventually, he called for a recess, and the board members huddled in a corner, arguing in low voices. When they returned, Donald made an announcement. The board will conduct a comprehensive review of our enforcement procedures. In the meantime, all disputed violations will be placed on hold pending review. We'll schedule a special meeting in 2 weeks to address these concerns. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was something. As residents filed out, several people approached me, Carol, and Roberto to share their own HOA horror stories. It became clear that Patricia's aggressive enforcement had touched many more people than just the three of us. Gary Richmond caught up with me in the parking lot. That went better than expected. Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. She's not going to let this go, I said. Probably not. But now you've got witnesses and documentation. That's ammunition. The next morning, I woke to find my workshop door standing open. I'd locked it the night before, I was certain of that. I ran outside in my pajamas and house slippers, my heart pounding. Inside the workshop, nothing appeared to be stolen. My tools were all in place. The expensive maple table I'd been working on sat undisturbed on the workbench. But someone had been there. Cabinet doors stood open. My file cabinet, where I kept project plans and receipts, had been rifled through. Papers were scattered across my desk. I called the Boulder County Sheriff's Department. The deputy who responded was a young woman named Officer Chen. She took photographs of the forced entry on the door lock and the disturbed interior. "Anything missing?" she asked. "Not that I can tell. It looks like someone was searching for something." "Any idea what?" I hesitated, then told her about the HOA dispute. "I have permits and inspection documents for my heater installation. They're in that file cabinet. Someone from the HOA has been issuing false violation notices." Officer Chen wrote down the details. "You think an HOA board member broke into your workshop to steal permit documents?" Saying it out loud, it sounded paranoid and ridiculous. I don't know, maybe it was just random vandalism. In Meadowbrook Hills, this area has almost zero property crime. Officer Chen closed her notebook. I'll file a report. You should get that lock replaced and maybe install a security camera. If someone comes back, we'll have them on video. After Officer Chen left, I went through my files more carefully. The permits and inspection documents for my heater were still there, but they'd clearly been moved. Someone had looked through them. What I couldn't find was the folder where I'd been collecting all my HOA documentation, the violation notices, my photos of the workshop paint, the email exchanges with Deborah. That folder was gone. I called Carol Simpson. Someone broke into my workshop last night. What? Are you serious? They took my HOA documentation, all the evidence I'd been gathering. There was a long pause. Paul, this has escalated beyond HOA petness. If someone is breaking into your property, we need to involve the police more seriously. I filed a report, but they treated it like random vandalism. I don't have proof it was related to the HOA. You have copies of the documents. Most of them, yeah. The emails are all still in my account. I can reprint the violation notices, but it's disturbing that someone specifically targeted that file. I'm going to call an attorney friend of mine. We might need legal representation for this. That afternoon, I installed a security camera system in my workshop. 4 cameras covering all angles, recording to a cloud service. The system cost $600 I hadn't planned to spend, but I needed to know if someone came back. The next few days passed tensely. I kept expecting another violation notice or another break-in. Instead, I got an email from Deborah requesting a meeting with me, Carol, and Roberto at the Summit Community Services office. We gathered in a larger conference room this time. Deborah had printed out a thick stack of documents. I've completed my review of violation notices issued over the past year, she said. The results are concerning. Of the 43 violation notices issued during this period, 31 were initiated by Patricia Brenner directly. Of those 31, I've determined that 19 cited non-existent regulations, misinterpreted existing regulations, or were contradicted by documented evidence in our files. Roberto leaned forward. So more than half of Patricia's violation notices were bogus. That's one way to put it. More professionally, I'd say there's been a consistent pattern of overzealous enforcement without proper verification of the actual covenant language. What about the board? Carol asked. Didn't Donald or Margaret review these notices before they went out? That's part of the problem. Patricia handles day-to-day enforcement as vice president. Most violation notices go out without full board review unless the homeowner appeals. It's an efficiency measure, but it means Patricia had essentially unchecked authority. Had, I noticed the past tense. Deborah allowed herself a small smile. The board met in executive session yesterday. Patricia has been removed from all enforcement duties. Going forward, all violation notices must be reviewed by the full board before issuance. Additionally, the board has voted to dismiss all pending violations that were found to be based on incorrect covenant interpretations. Is Patricia still on the board? Carol asked. For now, yes, but her role is significantly reduced, and there's more. Deborah pulled out another document. We're recommending that the Homeowners Association adopt a new dispute resolution policy. It includes mandatory mediation for contested violations, clearer documentation requirements, and protections against retaliatory enforcement. It felt like a victory, but something bothered me. Patricia's not going to take this well. Probably not, Deborah agreed, but the board was unanimous in their decision. Even Donald, who's worked with Patricia for years, agreed that the situation had become untenable. We left the meeting feeling cautiously optimistic. The HOA was taking action. Patricia's power had been curtailed. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the memory of my workshop standing open, my files scattered, that one folder missing. 2 days later, my security cameras caught someone approaching my workshop at 2 in the morning. I got an alert on my phone and pulled up the live feed. A figure in dark clothing and a baseball cap was trying the workshop door. When it didn't open, they moved to the window, shining a flashlight inside. I called 911 while simultaneously watching the feed. The figure gave up on the window and moved toward my house, trying the back door. "There's an intruder on my property right now," I told the dispatcher. "I have security footage. They're trying to break in." Boulder County Sheriff's deputies arrived within 6 minutes. I watched from my bedroom window as they caught the figure trying to jimmy open my back door. There was a brief struggle, then the person was on the ground in handcuffs. I went outside as the deputies were loading the suspect into their patrol car. One deputy approached me. "Mr. Bradley, that's your workshop the suspect was trying to enter." "Yes, and they tried my house too." "Who is it?" The deputy consulted his notes. "Driver's license says Kenneth Brenner. Does that name mean anything to you?" My stomach dropped. "Brenner, is he related to Patricia Brenner?" "Says here his address is the same as a Patricia Brenner." "You know them?" I explained the HOA situation, Patricia's violation notices, the break-in from a few days earlier. The deputy's expression grew more serious. "We're going to need your security footage from tonight and from the previous incident. This might be more than simple trespassing." At the sheriff's station the next morning, I gave a full statement to a detective named Laura Martinez. I brought copies of all the HOA documents, the violation notices, Deborah's report, and the security footage from both incidents. Detective Martinez reviewed everything carefully. "So you believe Patricia Brenner sent her husband to steal documentation that would prove she'd been issuing fraudulent violation notices?" I know how it sounds, but my workshop was broken into, and only HOA documents were taken. Now her husband is caught on camera trying to break in again. Kenneth Brenner isn't talking yet. He lawyered up immediately, but between your footage and the previous break-in, we have enough for charges. Breaking and entering, attempted burglary, and possibly conspiracy if we can prove Patricia was involved. What happens now? We'll investigate further. I'll want to interview Patricia Brenner. We'll also be looking at phone records, financial records, anything that might establish a pattern. If Patricia directed her husband to commit these crimes, she'll face charges too. I left the station feeling surreal. What had started as a dispute over a workshop heater had escalated into criminal charges. Part of me felt guilty. Had I pushed too hard? Made too big a deal out of some violation notices? But then I remembered Carol Simpson, who'd done nothing wrong but oppose a fee increase. The Martinez family, blamed for offense that predated their ownership. The pattern of harassment, the made-up regulations, the abuse of authority. No, I'd done the right thing. The story broke in the local news 2 days later. HOA board member's husband arrested in connection with break-ins, read the headline in the Boulder Daily Camera. The article outlined the charges against Kenneth Brenner and mentioned the ongoing investigation into HOA violations. Reporter Sarah Kellerman had done her homework, interviewing several Meadowbrook Hills residents about their experiences with questionable enforcement. My phone rang constantly. Neighbors I barely knew called to express support or share their own Patricia stories. A local TV station wanted to interview me. I declined, not wanting to turn this into a media circus. The HOA held an emergency meeting the following Thursday. The community center was packed, with overflow attendants standing in the back. Patricia Brenner was notably absent. Donald Fletcher looked like he'd aged a decade. He opened the meeting with a grim announcement. The board has accepted Patricia Brenner's resignation effective immediately. We're also conducting a comprehensive review of all enforcement actions taken over the past 3 years. Any homeowner who believes they were wrongly cited can request a review and potential refund of any fines paid. Margaret Holmes spoke next. I want to apologize on behalf of the board. Many of these issues occurred because we weren't providing adequate oversight. We trusted Patricia to handle enforcement appropriately, and that trust was misplaced. We're implementing new policies to ensure this never happens again. The meeting continued with discussions of the new dispute resolution procedures, plans to hire an independent compliance officer, and changes to the board structure to prevent any single member from having unchecked authority. During public comment, Carol Simpson stood. I appreciate the board's actions, but we need accountability beyond just accepting a resignation. If crimes were committed, the criminal justice system needs to handle that. But the HOA also needs to make restitution to homeowners who were harmed by this abuse of power. We're working with our attorney on that, Donald said. Any homeowner who paid fines based on invalid violations will receive full refunds with interest. We're also considering whether the association has grounds to sue Patricia Brenner personally for the damage she's caused. Roberto Martinez raised his hand. What about the costs we incurred defending ourselves? Legal fees, time off work, the stress this caused our families. We're exploring all options, Margaret said. We want to make this right. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, the board had committed to several concrete actions: refunding all questionable fines, revising enforcement procedures, requiring annual training for board members on fair housing and HOA laws, and establishing an ombudsman position for homeowners to report concerns. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. 3 weeks later, Detective Martinez called me. Thought you'd want to know, we're filing charges against Patricia Brenner. Kenneth gave a full statement as part of a plea deal. Patricia directed him to break into your workshop and retrieve the documents. She knew about the false violations and was trying to eliminate evidence. What charges? Conspiracy to commit burglary, destruction of evidence, and we're also looking at charges related to the fraudulent violation notices. The DA is reviewing whether her actions constitute criminal fraud or theft, since homeowners paid fines based on false claims. How much time could she face? Depends on how the charges shake out and whether she takes a plea. But she's looking at potentially several years in prison if convicted on all counts. The legal process moved slowly. Kenneth Brenner pleaded guilty to burglary and received 2 years probation. Patricia fought the charges, maintaining she'd done nothing wrong, that Kenneth had acted on his own, that she was being persecuted for being a dedicated volunteer. But the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records showed multiple calls between Patricia and Kenneth on the nights of both break-ins. Text messages referenced getting rid of the evidence and making the problem go away. Financial records showed Patricia had withdrawn $5,000 in cash the day after the first break-in, money that Kenneth claimed she gave him as payment. The trial lasted 4 days. I testified about the violation notices, the missing documents, the security footage. Carol Simpson testified about her experience with Patricia's enforcement tactics. Deborah from Summit Community Services testified about the pattern of invalid violations. Detective Martinez walked the jury through the evidence of the break-ins. Patricia's attorney tried to paint her as an overzealous volunteer who'd made mistakes but had no criminal intent. He argued that Kenneth had misunderstood her complaints about the homeowners and acted independently. He claimed the text messages were taken out of context. The jury didn't buy it. After 6 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts: conspiracy to commit burglary, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of fraud related to the false violation notices and collection of invalid fines. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. The judge, a stern woman named Barbara Yates, reviewed the case thoroughly. "Miss Brenner, you were given a position of trust within your community. Homeowners relied on you to enforce the rules fairly and honestly. Instead, you abused that trust for personal vendetta. You created false violations, harassed homeowners who disagreed with you, and when confronted with evidence of your wrongdoing, you conspired to destroy that evidence through illegal means. This wasn't a mistake or overzealousness. This was deliberate, calculated misconduct." Judge Yates sentenced Patricia to 3 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She also ordered restitution to the homeowners who'd been affected by the false violations, including reimbursement for legal fees, time lost from work, and other damages. The total came to over $70,000. Patricia remained stone-faced through the sentencing, but I saw her hands shaking as the bailiff led her away. In the parking lot outside the courthouse, Roberto Martinez approached me. "Thank you for not letting this go. If you just paid the fine and removed your heater, she would have kept doing this to people." "I almost did just pay it," I admitted. "It would have been easier. But you didn't. You stood up to her, and that made the difference." The aftermath took months to fully settle. The HOA hired a forensic accountant to review all financial transactions over Patricia's tenure. They found additional irregularities: vendor contracts awarded to companies owned by Patricia's relatives, HOA funds used for personal expenses disguised as community improvements, kickbacks from contractors. The total misappropriation exceeded $200,000 over 8 years. The HOA filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia to recover the stolen funds. Her house in Meadowbrook Hills went up for sale to pay the judgments against her. Kenneth divorced her while she was in prison. For the community itself, the healing process was slower. The new board worked hard to rebuild trust, but attendance at HOA meetings remained high. Homeowners who'd previously ignored association business now paid close attention. Several new residents ran for board positions, bringing fresh perspectives and professional expertise. The board hired a new management company with stricter oversight procedures. They revised the covenants to include clear appeals processes and protections against retaliatory enforcement. They established term limits for board members to prevent anyone from accumulating too much power again. My workshop became something of a legend in the neighborhood. "That's where it all started," people would say, pointing to the building as they walked by. Kids on bikes would pause to look at the workshop that had brought down the HOA tyrant. I finished my maple table project and donated it to the community center. It sits in the main lobby now, with a small plaque, in recognition of the Meadowbrook Hills homeowners who stood up for fairness and accountability. The Titan 3000 heater kept my workshop comfortable through 2 more Colorado winters. Every time I worked in the shop, I thought about that first violation notice, Patricia standing at my door with her clipboard, so certain of her authority. She'd been wrong about the heater being illegal. She'd been wrong about having unlimited power over her neighbors. And she'd been catastrophically wrong in thinking she could break the law to cover up her misconduct. My life returned mostly to normal, though I remained active in HOA affairs. I joined the Architectural Review Committee, determined to ensure that approval processes were fair and based on actual regulations. I helped write the new homeowner handbook, making the rules clearer and more accessible. One Saturday afternoon, about a year after Patricia's sentencing, I was in my workshop building a crib for my daughter's first baby when Gary Richmond stopped by. "Heard you're going to be a grandfather. Congratulations." "Thanks. It's exciting and terrifying in equal measure." Gary walked around the workshop, admiring the tools and projects in various stages of completion. "You know, this whole mess with Patricia taught me something. For years, I kept my head down, didn't make waves, just tried to follow the rules and stay out of trouble. But sometimes you have to make waves. Sometimes you have to say, this isn't right and I'm not going to accept it." "That's surprisingly philosophical for you, Gary," he laughed. "Retirement gives you time to think. But seriously, you did a good thing here. Not just for yourself, but for everyone in this community." After Gary left, I sat at my workbench looking at the partially completed crib. I thought about the grandchild who'd sleep in it someday, about the community that child would grow up in, about the importance of standing up when something isn't right. The heater hummed quietly, keeping the workshop at a comfortable 68 degrees despite the February cold outside. Legal, permitted, fully compliant with all regulations, both real and imagined. Sometimes the smallest battles matter the most. Sometimes a workshop heater is just a workshop heater, and sometimes it's the first thread that, when pulled, unravels years of corruption and abuse. I picked up my saw and got back to work on the crib, grateful for my warm workshop, my supportive neighbors, and the hard-learned lesson that standing up for what's right, even in something as mundane as an HOA dispute, can make a difference. The Meadowbrook Hills subdivision continued to thrive, now with better governance, clearer rules, and a board that actually served the homeowners rather than ruling over them. Property values increased as word spread about the community's transformation. New residents often asked about the infamous HOA scandal when they toured homes in the neighborhood. Real estate agents used it as a selling point. This community learned from its mistakes and implemented some of the strongest homeowner protections in Colorado. As for me, I kept building furniture in my workshop, volunteering on HOA committees and enjoying my quiet life in Boulder's suburbs. The violation notice that started everything sat framed on my workshop wall, a reminder that sometimes the most important battles begin with a simple word. No. No, that regulation doesn't exist. No, I won't accept false charges. No, you can't abuse your authority without consequences. One simple word, backed up with permits, documentation, and the courage to fight for what was right. That's all it took to transform a community and bring a tyrant to justice. And my workshop stayed warm through every Colorado winter that followed.